out because I have to get ready for my session, but I just wanted to check on y'all.
Good luck,
Thank
Michelle.
you.
All right, thank you. Y'all have fun.
Thank you. Now okay. Now I can't see handouts on my thing.
She's our keynote's still talking, so
Oh, okay.
nobody's in here.
My handouts don't show. I wonder why. I thought they did before. Oh.
Oh, you have to hit when you want to share. I can share them. Do you want me to share them?
Probably
so you go to
when,
handouts and you
but
there should be
slides. I have slides. Okay, no. I had handouts before. I don't know why.
it's right next to chat. So chat, Q&A, polls, and handouts.
But it doesn't show it now. I have slides, video, breakout,
Do you want me
screen.
to share them all so that they're there?
Yeah.
Or preview?
Weird, because I had them before. That is really weird. When I came in first, I had handout. Because I was looking at them, but now it's not there. That is really weird.
Check right now.
Well, I don't see the icon. It says settings on, it says screen, slides, video, breakout. And when I hit more, it just says invite people, exit webinar. It doesn't have them anymore. That's really weird. I don't know what happened.
Hold on.
No, I don't see them. Exit. That's really. I'm gonna. I have to run to the restroom before we.
Okay.
All right. So let me just do this. Hello, Liz. That's
Yeah, they're still in the keynote. We only have
okay.
two people here.
Okay. So yeah, if you could share the handouts, because for some reason
I can see them.
I can't. I
Let
could
me see.
when I first came in. I had handouts. I had because all I have is breakout.
And I'll
Um,
ask the people in here if someone will tell me. Let's see.
Video. I have slides. These are my, yeah, I have my higher ed. Yeah, those are my slides. Screen, my video and mic on, settings, and I don't have, that's really strange because I had them when I came in and now I don't. Because I had the handouts were the only thing. And
Oh,
then
my friend is here. Natalie, can you tell me if you see handouts on here? Can you chat and let me know? And we usually have someone helping us. Oh, he says they should see it within the chat panel.
the
He
chat.
said you may have collapsed the panel. So if you click the orange chat button,
Oh, I
you'll bring
got
the
it.
panel back up.
Thank you. Now, okay, I must have done that. Yeah. So
Yes, we have someone who's helping us, but he'll be in and out. He's covering a couple of sessions.
So would you suggest then I probably shouldn't make it full because otherwise I won't be able to see the chat. And okay, I see now how it works.
So I shared them all. Is that okay?
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine because we're yeah. And then so I think what I did is that. Okay, go back here. That. Yeah, I must have clicked on something. I was just clicking away. Chat. Okay, if I
And
click
they
on,
just finished, so maybe in a few minutes we can start.
okay. Oh, in the public. Okay, so now I can see. Remember, I was asking you, oh, how do I get into? Okay, now I see attendees. It was me. I clicked on something. Silly me.
You are an amazing educator. I would have loved for you to be a professor to me
Oh, thank
while I was at the
you.
university.
Oh, thank you
I
so much.
never had a woman of color
Oh my
during
goodness.
uh, my undergrad, my graduate.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now you can definitely be for
Yeah.
others the work that you're doing now. It's amazing. This strand is amazing. I'm just like, wow. It's really the first of its kind. I don't think I've seen
I'm
anyone
so
do.
honored that, I was given such trust to, yes, Liz, go ahead.
That's great. Great organization. So I listened to the keynote, the first one. It was powerful. The hope. Wow, that
Yes.
was powerful. Yeah.
And the other two were really good too. The one who just spoke was really good. I was trying to listen to it. I see about 9.
Yeah, there's 9.
Maybe we'll give like 2 or 3 more minutes. Is that okay, Dr.
Yeah.
Ibarra?
Yeah. Yes, that would be fine. I know because more registered, but I don't know if they're just not, they how that's working.
Well, yeah. We had for this session there was over 100
Yeah.
people.
So they'll probably come in as the presentation goes. I assume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A
That's
lot of
fine.
people, what I noticed is that they're at their job and they're kind of
Yeah.
jumping in between like meetings and
Yeah. Kind of like I was yesterday. I had a meeting and I was like, oh my gosh, I want to listen to it. How do you pronounce her name? Bambino? Babino?
Babino, Dr.
Babino. See,
Babino.
I've heard her say it and I'm like, oh my gosh, I did not pronounce it correctly. Babino.
Babino.
Yeah. So I listened to some of hers but I had to go back to a meeting, so I left. So that's probably what's
They'll
happening.
all be available in the future. So,
Mm-hmm.
like a series. So it'll be nice.
Yeah, I had a doctor, couple of colleagues. She's at UT Austin. Flores, Tracy Flores. She messaged me. She's like, "Hey, I wanna." She does a lot with Somos Escritores. She's like myself, a new professor, and but she's at UT Austin, and she does amazing work with Somos Escritores. And I told her, "Man, the Translanguaging Corriente runs through your work." And she's like, "Yeah." She's just they were gonna try to make it, but she's like, "I don't know," because they have their workshop, their um, talks this week as well. So I don't see her there. So I give her the link.
Yeah, maybe she'll jump on.
Yeah, that's what you said. We're going to try to jump on, and then we're going to start our own workshop over at UT. They're doing it with um, the Gloria Saldua Center that they have. They don't call it that. I forgot what it's called, but they have like all these archives of Gloria Saldua in there.
Wow.
I know. I said, oh, I wish I could go.
I'm going next week, and then I'm going the following week too. So maybe I'll have to find a way to go visit that.
Yeah, I've been
I didn't
wanting.
know that.
Yeah, they have it, and it has a name, but I can't remember. But it's the Gloria Saldua. All there's a lot of archives of her writing and everything. So, but I've been wanting to go too.
Are you okay? We start, Dr. Ibarra-Johnson?
I'm ready. Yep. Yes.
Sounds good. Well, welcome to IDRA's EX South's Translanguaging for Social Justice strand. It's our final day. Hopefully, you've been taking some good notes, and you'll be ready for today's session. And then later on in the afternoon, after lunch, join us to come up with your action plan to take back to your school, your district, or even your classroom. I'm so honored to have Dr. Susana Ibarra-Johnson. She was on my dissertation committee. So I'm so honored that she was able to join us. She is an assistant professor of bilingual education in TESOL at New Mexico State University. She specializes in developing bi and multilingual and biliteracy curriculum, instruction and assessment with bilingual TESOL educators through participatory design action research. Her research focuses on translanguaging pedagogy in bilingual education and English language development contexts to promote socially just and effective bilingual education instructional programs and materials for culturally and linguistically diverse students population. So I am so honored that she's here with us, um, joining us. Bienvenida, Dr. Johnson Ibarra.
Gracias, Doctora Piñón. And good morning, buenos días a todos. Thank you for being here. And I would like to know where some of you are from. So if, I know I see your names, but if you can put in the chat where you're from, that would be great. We'll just take a minute to do that. And then I'll jump. As you do that, I'll tell you a little bit more about myself, just because I think it's important. This work for me is very personal, the translanguaging, and even now more in higher education, where I'm at now for the last couple of years. Although I had been in higher ed as an adjunct professor at University of New Mexico for 6 years, and now I'm second year at New Mexico State University, where I am learning a lot from my students, and I teach in the bilingual education in TESOL, as Dr. Piñón mentioned. And the other thing that I think is important is that just a little bit about myself is that that I actually grew up on the borderlands of Eagle Pass, Texas, and Piedras Negras, Coahuila, where I know a lot of people are like, oh, translanguaging is new, and it's not new because I grew up bilingual and biliterate. And so I think for me, this is very personal. I really identify with it a lot just because of my experiences as a, if you will, a borderlander. And of course, there's linguistic borderlands, but there's also other metaphorical borderlands that we intersect in our lives. So thank you. If you just could place that would be great. And I can, I think some of you, I don't know if I'm not seeing the chat there. Okay. So we'll get started, because I know I'll get to know you more as we move into this presentation. And so one of the things I want to start off with, because I know my colegas since Tuesday, from Kate Seltzer to Ascencio Moreno, and some of the presenters, Dr. Stewart yesterday, and then now Thursday, and some of you may or may not, but if you have, then great. I'd like to see how confident and are you in implementing or supporting a translanguaging pedagogy. So I want to get just a sense of where you're at. And I'm going to put the poll, and if you could, I'm going to start it right now. If you could take a minute to do that, that would be great. There we go. I see some. So great. Some high confidence and some moderate confidence. So great. Good to see. And I don't know. I think I can. Well, I can read it out. I'm not sure if I can share it just because. But it looks like definitely we have. Most of you being in moderate confidence in implementing, supporting translanguaging pedagogy, and then with some with slight confidence, and another handful with high confidence. So that's great to see that no one has no confidence. So I'm glad to see that, though, so we can get a sense of who's what your confidence level, because again, some of you may or may not been here as you followed the strand. So thank you for taking a minute to do that. And because I think my topic is about translanguaging in higher education, so the question is what do we teach future teachers about translanguaging? There's so much to teach. The last decade or so, really now the last 2 decades with translanguaging, because I really believe that since 2009, when Ofelia Garcia published her seminal work of bilingual education in the 21st century, that she brought the term translanguaging and really popularized it here in the United States. And I definitely, I think that it's important to now to just kind of take a sense of what is, what do we teach teachers? And so one of the things that I like to start off with is that I like to start with teachers as a teacher educator is looking at doing a language portrait. And so as a grounding activity, now do it for all my classes. Basically what we do is it's really taking an inventory of their linguistic repertoire. And so you could use any codes, languages, any expression, or how you communicate, and you map it out, and preferably if you have colored pencils. If not, no worries. You can use a pen, pencil, just a piece of paper that you need. You can even draw a body silhouette, as I will show you right now with the student example. And then, or a timeline. I usually do timelines because I'm not as artistic as some of my students are, and so I documented, from birth what my languages were, and then and create or any other visual that you want to create it with. So I don't want to limit it just to a silhouette and then you have to draw as this student has. And so and then you will also again, it is up to you what your categories are, what the language, what the codes that you use, all the linguistic resources that you use to communicate. And so to provide an example, I want you to look here at my students, and this is a language portrait that Isabella, the pseudonym of my student, is. So she described, obviously you could see here, with 3 solid colors, pink and purple, and a gradient of orange. And so with this, of course, we won't have time today to write a narrative about it, a written narrative or an oral narrative. You'll have time to draw it and then discuss it a little bit. But in my teacher preparation courses, I do have them elaborate more as Isabella. So I'll show you a little bit about what it represents here. And she mentioned that her home language was Spanish, and mentioned that Spanish was the foundation of my identity, which is why Spanish, and you can see the orange there, is at the bottom of her dress in the portrait. It represents the base of the language development for her. Further, Isabella says that she depicts the dress as passing from one point to another, depicting it with a gradient shade. And you can see that from the bottom to the top, there's a gradient shade of orange. Since her schooling was developed in English-only school, and her language started to adapt into Spanglish, as you can see in the label that she has there. She further explains that her dress moves from a deep orange to a light orange at the top of the dress to show how her language was impacted by the culture around her. And then you could see here at the top the purple. She depicts culturally. She speaks millennial English because she identifies as a millennial, and but at the end she does mention, which I thought was very powerful for me as an instructor, was that for Isabella, her cultures and languages impacted how she developed as a human and how she communicates with others in different contexts in her education. And she mentioned that she wanted, when people see this portrait, and hopefully you see this as well, you see the dress, and she says, culturally, I see myself as a Mexicana, and that this dress really represents the culture of my family, and so forth. So this is how she depicted this. Granted, as I said, you can definitely do the silhouette. You can maybe use the silhouette that you see there, and add your particular languages and codes and how you communicate, or a timeline or any other form of visual that you like. Does anyone have any questions before I will give you some time to do this individually? And then, so I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and then I will put you into, and I don't know how many we are. We're 15. So I think what we're going to do, we'll go into a breakout room to discuss a little bit about your language portrait. So go ahead and take about, I'll check in 5 minutes, usually about 5 or 8 minutes seems to be enough time, but go ahead and get started with your language portrait. And if you have any questions, please place them in the chat. Okay, we are at 5 minutes. So what I'm going to do, since it's a good sized group that we can do one breakout room or go to a breakout room and discuss. For those of you that would like to share your language portrait, I personally do timelines, but we will do that at this time. And so what we will do is I'm going to start the breakout room, and if all of us could go to breakout room 1, that would put us all together so that way we can um, see each other. Okay, so let's meet in breakout room 1. I'm going to start it now. Thank you all for those of you that shared. I know we it was very rich to see, and so that's kind of my next slide. We were going to have we reported out, and I figured since we were a small enough group that we could go into a breakout room. So for those of you that shared your language portraits, and I think one of the again, from a teacher education perspective, and it really, in reality, in any professional development, this is essential because you really get to know who your participant students are, and in a linguistic way, in a linguistic and cultural way. And I think that's very important to see. And I
Hi,
think,
Susana. I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is Blake with Big Marker. I just wanted to let you know that the breakouts are still open, so the attendees aren't back in this main room yet.
okay, so I need to close them. Sorry.
Yep, just click breakout and then close. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I was talking to myself, so so I put I closed the breakout room. So
Yep, attendees are back here now.
okay. All right, thank you. Please interrupt whenever I'm not doing something I'm supposed to be doing. So appreciate it. So welcome all of you back. Sorry, I forgot the one step to close the breakout room. So now we're all here, and I just want to mention thank you so much for sharing. And I just want to, before we move on, to point out how important this is for myself as a teacher educator. For me, it's essential to start with this, and what I've collected from my students is amazing. Just what they express. Some of them express of course, their joys of their bilingualism, and some of them express their scars in bilingualism, and so it just depends. And just like some of you shared how you didn't grow up with Spanish for numerous reasons, and schooling, it wasn't available, and so forth. So I think it tells you a lot about your students, and I think also participants. So if you're like a professional developer or a leader, it's great, and I always encourage my own students to use with their students. And when they write their narrative, it's very rich, and also very telling of who they are. So again, I like to be able to get a sense of who they are first and foremost before I even get started with, as I am right now with the goals that we have laid upon us today. So what I have today's goals is we're going to look at developing pedagogical clarity through a translanguaging classroom framework. And then have some reflection, although we'll have it throughout, but really reflect upon exploring translanguaging. And we're going to look at design, ideology, and theory connections. And then lastly, give you some time for planning through a reflective process. And so I have a handout, and if you're familiar with this platform, you can probably see where the handouts are. But if not, there's a tab that says handouts. But as we move through, I'll prompt you to those, so that way you can be able to access those handouts to do the activity. So that's what I have for us today. And hopefully we definitely, myself, I am if you have a question, please unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. If you interrupt me, that's not a problem at all. I definitely like to hear what you would like to say, or ask me questions or comments. So either or works for me, and don't hesitate to do that, please, as we go through the couple hours that we have together today. So one of the things that I want to share is the pedagogical clarity is actually a term that I use, that I was a finding from my dissertation. And so I'll expand upon it a little bit, because I think it's important as we explore translanguaging classroom and the framework that myself and Ofelia Garcia and Kate Seltzer, that presented on Tuesday, that did a great job of looking at the translanguaging classroom. So for some of you, it might be a couple of slides may be familiar, but I'll definitely expand upon it from a different perspective of the work that I do. And so we're going to look at the why. So because I think in our work, we need to, especially in higher education, and is looking at the critical consciousness, the stance, the frame of mind, because all teachers come with a set of beliefs, a set of ideologies, a set from wherever that they learned in their undergrad or in their communities, and that we need to validate. But at the same time, as myself, I learned a lot going into graduate school, mainly about pedagogy and ideologies. And so, as I mentioned, this is one of my major findings in my own dissertation, my work and my dissertation work, as I did 3 case studies at a 3rd to 5th grade dual language classrooms. And basically, I followed the lead, of course, of ideological clarity from Lilia Bartolome that talks about ideological clarity that we need to have. And so I definitely learned a lot from her research and then drew upon it, and Paulo Freire as well. But I think basically pedagogical clarity is having this increased consciousness of what our practice is. What is it that we're doing? And this is what the teachers really showed me, that what is it that I'm doing in my classroom and so forth. But then it becomes their frame of mind, and we have discussions and dialogues about it. And some of them shifted to different types of ways of doing bilingualism in their classroom or biliteracy. Then they would enact it with their students. So it's very cyclical. It's not like you do this and that. I see it as a cycle for the teachers. And one example that I have here is of one of my classroom, one of my courses that I taught this past semester in biliteracy pedagogy, is that I do reading journals for a reason, because I really, not just to collect them, but I want to know their insights of what is it that they're thinking in regards to what we're reading. In this particular journal, they were reading Garcia and Sanchez, Transformando la Educación de Bilingües Emergentes, Transforming Education for Bilingual Emergence. And you could see the quote here that the students selected. It says basically the student is talking about how even changing the name of English learners to emergent bilinguals is what they are actually doing, because they are bilinguals. They're not just learning English. They're coming already with, whether it's Spanish, Dene, Keres, Hmong, whatever that may be, and they're expanding upon their linguistic repertoire. But if you can see her reaction or reflection that she has here, and if you don't mind me, I'll read it to you. It says, what a mind shift a label can make to our bilingual students. This should become more common among schools and educational labels. In this region of the U.S., we still use the term English language learner, or a variation of that. This label automatically sets the stage for students of a language other than English to be acclimated to English. Using a label like bilingües emergentes tells us that they are biliterate. One of the words that I really honed in as I was reading her journal, and after the course is over, I usually have about 25 pages from each student of their reactions, reflections. And it's when I read through them, I just learn so much from them. But the word acclimated. So for me, acclimated is like change, like, when the weather changes or when you get acclimated to a certain climate and so forth. So so that for me, it was like, wow, she really understood. She got that the emergent bilinguals, that's why we're using that, because we want to change the way we view our students. And so it was very powerful for me to see that from a student. And this is just one little snippet. I think definitely could share even more and more. But that just to give you an example of some of the clarity as they read, as they discuss in class, as they we challenge each other and so forth, that is very important. So what I want you to do, and we're going to be using the chat a lot in the next couple of slides, because I think it's important to again, reflection in developing what I call pedagogical, but also translanguaging clarity, is I use something that I learned from La Doctora Ofelia Garcia, is a collaborative descriptive inquiry. And actually it's from Garcia and Klein and Tatiana Klein. And so I'm going to be showing or viewing some slides. And then basically, I will provide, as we go through the slides, you will see that a description of where, what there is, feelings about what there is, and an interpretation of what there is. So I'm just kind of front loading this just so you know what I'm, as I show those images, and I would love for you to participate by placing in the chat what your thoughts are. So I'll give you a minute after each slide and provide a prompt. So vamos a comenzar. So given, how is it depicted here, this visual that you see here? And again, you can place this in the chat, whatever words pop into your head or images. With what colors? ¿Qué colores miran? What lines? What shapes? What forms? ¿Qué formas miran? Great. Some ebb and flow of two languages. The fluidity. Language, good as multiple ripples of water. Transformation. Shades of blues and morado. High waves. Olas fluidas. Yes, Ginny, that's right. Wavy to smoother. That's right. Thank you, Natalie. Ahora, quiero que escuchen. I want you to hear. So close your eyes and listen. What do you hear? ¿Qué oyen? Does it taste or smell? ¿Cómo se siente la ola? So again, share in the chat what your thoughts are. Ripple effect, becoming stronger. The ripple effect, blue, sad, continuously changing. Another couple of seconds to think about it. What is it that you, cool energies creating movements. Does it smell or taste? Unstable flow. Okay, this last image. Juan said, escucho el agua gorgojeando. Huele rico como un descanso de continuo cambio. Gracias. And now let's just look a little bit here to interpret. So what do you think the river corriente of the cover means? So as you look at the river corriente of the cover of the Translanguaging classroom, and most importantly, why is student bilingualism seen as olas? Why do you think, what do you think that means? What is the relationship of the image to your own bilingualism, to that of your estudiantes? One level flowing, and someone commented, one level flowing into another. World is changing and growing, smaller the need for different languages. And so I ask you also, we look at the title underneath the Translanguaging classroom. It says, leveraging student bilingualism for learning. What do you think leveraging student bilingualism for learning means? What does that mean for you? Language should be fluid, yes. What does it mean in your, whatever grade level classroom you're in or whatever you're leading? What does that mean when you leverage student bilingualism for learning? Yeah, so observing above water what may not be clear to be seen underwater. Yes. Any other points, and what is it that the difference of being part of two languages is smoothing as they merge their identity into a person with a bilingual identity. Application of language to context, setting, yes. Students come in with an awesome repertoire of experiences in their own languages. Using that background knowledge helps students grow. Yes, thank you. Absolutely. Using it all in its totality. Most certainly. Okay. And so the last question, as I transition into looking at the relationship that you think exists between the olas, the waves, and translanguaging. And yes, and someone said we should be thinking multi-languages, most certainly. So thank you for sharing your thoughts as we went through this activity to really reflect upon what does it mean leveraging student bilingualism for learning, and the concept of that I move into that we last looked at, as a lot of you reflected upon, was the Translanguaging corriente. And as some of you mentioned, the fluidity, the fluidness of the student's language, and because it draws from their language and cultural practices. And that, I think, is missed by a lot of educators, because for many years we have, myself as a borderlander growing in the borderlands of Piedras Negras, Coahuila, and Eagle Pass, Texas. I was always seen in Coahuila or in Mexico as a pochita. Mira, es una pochita. She no habla muy bien el español. And then when I was in the United States, I was like also a pochita because I supposedly didn't speak English very well. So I think, but those were our cultural practices at home. And I think, it wasn't until I went to grad school that I really realized and valorized my reading Gloria Anzaldúa, reading Rodolfo Naya, reading just a lot of our Latina, Latinx authors, that I realized who I was. I was like, wow, I just learned so much from them and their culture and language practices. So we have to remember that and keep that in mind. And that's what the corriente is, right? The corriente is, they're moving in our classroom. And if we were to dip our hand, it seemingly looks like it's not moving. But when teachers do tap into it, you could feel the corriente, you could feel that current. And so I think that's important in our classrooms to be able to do that, because as a lot of you shared your language repertoires with the language portrait, it reflects their language repertoires, and we have to be able to, we're always dichotomized in our bilingual education. They're English dominant or Spanish dominant, or any other language other than English. But we have these bilinguals that are very vibrant, dynamic bilinguals that we need to keep in mind. And I think this is what translanguaging brings to the forefront in our work, and specifically the translanguaging corriente. And this image here is from our book that we developed, this translanguaging classroom framework. And so I'll just point out some of the points here. I know it's really the weaving in together of the performances as you see here. And what that means is we look at assessments very differently. We look at it from looking at a general linguistic performance, language specific performance, and then a dynamic translanguaging progressions. So basically, I like to tell my teachers, my students, and say, general linguistics, if you think about it, it's an objective where you bring in their entire linguistic repertoire and plan for it. And I'll show you an example of Maestro Otero, how she did it. Whereas language specific is, if you will, like a language objective with a specific language that you are focusing in the classroom. And then the translanguaging progressions is when you look at both languages and measure them on a continuum and so forth. And I know today I won't be going in depth in this, but that's just a brief overview of that. Where I will be focusing on this morning is looking at the teacher's translanguaging pedagogy. And we're looking at the stance, design, and shifts. The stance being those beliefs, those ideologies, frames of mind that teachers come with. And then the design being the lessons that they do, and the shifts. How do they tap into that corriente in their classroom? As you see here in the center is very essential. So I think all of these, again, we put them in order there, but they're very cyclical. I think the stance informs all of them, but it's in tandem that it works. So I want you to keep that in mind as we do this, as we go through our talk and work today. So the stance, and I mentioned this earlier, that it is looking at the philosophical, ideological, and belief system of teachers that we all come with, regardless who we are. We come with that set of beliefs, ideologies, and so forth. And I think from our perspective, I know when we were writing the book, we were really looking at the juntos. So how do we, with our teacher educators, how do we bring in the juntos where they are taking into account our students, their language practices? And how do we connect the home to the school? Because it always seems one way, the school to the home, but it needs to be about a two-way passage, if you will. And then the family, the community, how do we bring into the school? And then opening up those democratic classroom spaces that are very much needed with our students. So all of that is juntos. We're not separating one from the other, and it's critical for it to happen in our classrooms. So moving into a little more now into exploring the translanguaging design and ideology and theory connections. We're going to look at the translanguaging core beliefs, translanguaging design and practices, and what does that look like? So first of all, I'm not going to make the assumption that everybody knows what translanguaging is, just because myself, when I was learning, I had to look it up and so forth and learn about it. So I draw from the work of España and Herrera. And if you haven't been seen this particular book, In Comunidad, Lessons from Centering the Voice and Experiences of Bilingual Latinx Students, fabulous book that I use with my teacher educators. And it's just a book that brings to light how to open up those translanguaging spaces from K through 12, and just a lot of examples that they provide. But basically, as I highlighted there, is that linguistic repertoire is used and honored. So that's what I really love about their definition, is how do we use translanguaging to honor who these students are in our classrooms? Because in bilingual education and English as a second language, or TESOL classrooms, or English language development, a lot of times, and I must add general education too, we narrowly think we always have to separate the languages, because if not, they're not going to learn the target language and so forth. And so I think we need to understand that it's also a very social emotional part of it, that we need to honor them, their language practices as they come into our classrooms. And so I think the translanguaging is definitely a dynamic bilingualism. So we're looking at in right now, there's a lot of scholarly debate about translanguaging, that is it two monolinguals in one? Is it more of a dynamic, as myself and the work of Ofelia Garcia, that it's a very integrated, our linguistic features are integrated and interdependent. And this communication repertoire is what we project and what we know. And so we, as opposed to thinking that there's two monolinguals in one, as we have thought, and even science has caught up with that as they do cognitive linguistics and so forth. So I think for me, the bottom line is also for meaning making. I mean, we always get into this whole cognitive and scientific that we forget it's for meaning making as well for our students. So we need to remember that. And then again, as I said, it's to honor these language practices, because in the United States, as was my experience in living on the borderlands, is that that's how we spoke, that's how we expressed, that's how we wrote. And of course, given, a certain task, we knew how to shift to English or Spanish or where other languages that some of us learned. And as we interacted, but that's historically, when languages come into contact, that's what happens. And so I think we need to honor that and honor those practices in our classroom. But I do want you to think that it is not, translanguaging is not a broken semilingualism, as I know Jim Cummings has contributed a lot to bilingual education, but in some responses, in some ways, his term that there was an article, Half-Baked Theory, where he talked about semilingualism, and meaning that ni inglés ni español, or as some teachers I've heard say, a non-English, non-Spanish, which is very derogatory, and again, not validating our students' linguistic repertoire. And so I think, just to reiterate, it's definitely not bad or broken, and it's not new, as I mentioned earlier. Definitely group specific. I think the work of Centella with Spanglish, with the Puerto Ricans, I think that impacted our field so much, and it still does. So it's very group specific, and it's not just code switching. I think code switching, again, going back, it sees it as two separate linguistic systems, whereas translanguaging is one integrated system where we select certain features to communicate depending on the context and who we're speaking to. And then lastly, it's not just a scaffold. A lot of my educators think, okay, well, we're going to use it as a scaffold, use the home language. But it's not just that. It's like Kate Seltzer presented on Tuesday it's about social justice. How do we bring in these and validate our students' linguistic repertoire, their ways of communicating into our classrooms? So that's very important. So I know I did a lot of talking now, so I'm going to give you some time. Now, I have some translanguaging core beliefs, and in your handouts, if you look there are different handouts, but you will specifically in this breakout room, you're going to be looking at the translanguaging core beliefs, and it's an activity is what the label of it is. And I believe it went maybe if give you a minute to download it so you can have it with you. So when you go into your breakout room, I'll be giving you about 5 minutes to read it. And you can select which belief, because there's about 6 pages. Belief 1 is pages 56 to 57. Belief 2 is 57, 58, and etc. So you can see that if you have a phone, you can take a picture of it so you can go to your breakout room and see where the beliefs are, belief 1, belief 2, and belief 3. Select only one. We're going to try to evenly distribute you into the breakout room, so there's not, it's not too lopsided. Breakout 1 has more people than breakout 2, etc. So as you read, please identify any key phrases as you're reading from the readings that really resonate with you first, and then I will give you also 5 minutes to discuss with your breakout group to talk about what is it that you found in those pages about that core belief. So if you can do that, and also we will, I'm going to see if we can then get back together and then break out. Maybe we'll probably just share with each other, but not in a breakout room. We'll probably do a chat or unmute yourself. So at any rate, I'll tell you what to do after that. So it's about 10 to 12 minutes that I will let you do this activity. And I will begin the breakout rooms right now. But before that, are there any questions? So I'll pause a little bit here if you have any questions about this activity. You could put it in the chat or unmute yourself. Okay, don't see anyone. Let me double check the chat to make sure. Okay, that no one has any questions before I send you out. But if you do, you can always let us know. Okay, so we'll get started.
Maybe I'll push everyone to rooms 1, 2, and 3.
Okay, that sounds good. Thank you. I was going to join one, but I
Blake, can you help us with that? I'll try it too. I don't see it, but I'm sure.
Let's see. Breakout. Okay. So we have. Okay, yeah, because some are just one. So 1, 2, and 3, you said?
Yeah, if you want to push them all to 1, 2, and 3. It hasn't populated on my side yet. So if you can do that, that would be good. Oh, here, I found it.
2.
Or whichever, we could just make sure we're putting them in the same room.
2. Yeah, because like if there's only one, maybe move to 3. Move Jesus to 3.
Room 10 is a good group.
Move, okay, Jesus. So move to 5. I don't, because you're right. Because I think some are just one. Some, because Andrew only has one, so I'm gonna move him. Juan is by himself, so I'm gonna move him to 9. 9. Nomás con que no estén solos, because I know some are by themselves. Okay. Dana. Okay. I mean, some have 2 or 3. I guess 3 is fine. Or at least they have one. If they have a partner or a 3 is fine. Oh, okay. Ooh.
He must have done it.
What's that?
He must be moving them too.
Well, he put breakout room 1 is now like 10. There's 1, 2, 3, 4.
Oh.
Okay, that's fine. That's well because there's 3 beliefs. Oh no, he put them all. Okay. There's too many. I think there's too many. Oh no, I think he's putting all of them in breakout 1. Okay, so I'm gonna go in there and just tell him just to okay, just to read one of them. Okay.
Are they okay?
Yeah. Well, like Blake's by himself, and
I think I
okay,
think
yeah, they were 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, that's fine. No, that's good. You shifted them to other. Perfect. I think Blake is moved. I'm gonna move Blake because he's by himself. Or who is Blake? The Oh, he's the team big marker. Okay, he's part of the. Never mind. Never mind. Never mind. Yeah, I think that's fine. There's 3. Okay. I think so. See.
he moved them again.
Oh no.
Oh no, maybe not. Maybe I'm just thinking that.
No, I think it's.
I think it's good.
Yeah, that's good right there. Yeah. 3 groups are good because there's 3 core beliefs.
It's wonderful. You're doing a great job, Dr. Ibarra.
Thank you. The thing is, I originally do 3 breakout rooms, but since I didn't know how it was going to work, I just said just select one because, anyways. But I think it worked out. We have 3. That's and I'm timing it, so I'm gonna.
Okay.
And then I probably won't put them in a breakout room. We'll just have them. We'll bring them back, and then they can unmute themselves or put it in the chat. Or what do you think? Should we put them in one breakout room, like we did with the language portrait?
Oh yeah, when you're ready, I can move them all to the. She says that she's by herself in room 1, but she's not. So let's send them a message. Can you send them a message? Or here, please.
Oh, I forgot to mention that they need to turn. If they don't turn on their video and audio, it's like no one's there.
Turn on your video and audio. You should be in room 1, 2, or 3.
Did you send it out?
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone should be in room 1, 2, or 3. But if they don't turn on their cameras, you don't think anyone's in there. How about now?
Oh, it's weird that I didn't see the mess. It didn't come on mine.
And it disappeared off mine too when I sent it. So I'm asking my friend who's in there.
Okay. Huh.
She said yes. She's in the room, and it's fine.
Yeah, because if they don't. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna put this. Remember to share the key phrases and or practices. With your group. With you. I will give you 5 minutes. Okay, I sent that out.
Did I tell you it's my 21st anniversary today?
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Feliz aniversario.
Chicago's in Harvard. It's our first anniversary we don't spend together.
Oh my, you won't be able to afterwards? Are you gonna have to?
No, he's in Harvard doing a
Oh, I saw you went out. That's why I didn't hear that. Okay.
yeah, he's in Harvard. He's doing a leadership class. He's trying to move into administrative positions.
Oh, someone said they got kicked out again. Huh.
Oh.
Huh. What's going on?
Oh, I guess did the breakout rooms close?
No, I haven't. What happened? It says
Oh,
start.
they're here.
Oh, I didn't. I don't know what happened.
I don't know either. We had a little bit of issues yesterday, so
Okay.
they're all back in the room.
Okay. So great. That's
Gracias.
why some of you heard that que era su aniversario, ¿verdad? I was like, wow, how did I hear that? Bienvenidos otra vez. Okay, so let's I really, you know, I like to be able to see you, so I want to see you again or hear you, because I think you had a chance to read a core belief, 1, 2, or 3. So we are going to go, and Dr. Piñon, you can help. We're gonna go all to. I'm gonna do a breakout room so we can all either see or hear you, to breakout room 1. So when I start the breakout room, remember, select breakout room 1. Thank you. We'll see you. Nos vemos pronto. Okay, so thank you so much. Such a rich discussion that we had, and with the time, I think Dr. Pignon. Okay, there you are. I didn't know if you had any questions or anything or any. No, okay, we're good. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead again. Thank you, the rich discussion, and
I want to make sure they're back, Dr. Ibarra.
oh, okay. Yes, yes. I know. I jump in like as a.
Let me check because I don't think they're in here.
Okay, I will pause.
Let's see.
Those breakout rooms.
I closed it, so hopefully they're coming back now.
Oh, that's what I forget to do all the time. Thank you. I did that last time too. Thank you so much.
No problem. I'm learning it too, Dr. Ibarra.
Ah, estoy hablando aquí sola, and I was like, oh, I forgot to close the breakout.
They're back.
Yay. Okay, welcome back. Bienvenidos. I was mentioning, I apologize. I forget that I have to click for you to leave the breakout room. So thank you again for the rich discussion. Learned a lot, just the different contexts that you're in and the questions that you have. So I appreciate that. And just to look at the core beliefs very briefly and connect it to some of what you've shared. Of course, the core belief one, as we talked very extensively about the language practices and cultural knowledge of our students. And of course, some of you have in your classrooms, have in your courses and where you're, whatever context you're in, you've obviously have heard, por ejemplo, usted tiene big feet. Él me quitó la ball. Or as you will, I'll be showing you an example of Maestra Otero when she was teaching her students to write an opinion in the organization and so forth. They would start their essay in mi primera razón es que fueron greedy, or mi primera razón is that is better to win with others than friends and with a friend or others. And so we've heard that, and I think and to the point, I know I think it was Juan that mentioned, how do, when we have these bilinguals that are just so fluent, and yet, when we hear usted tiene big feet, we're like, oh my goodness, this is like, what is it? Is it English, Spanish, is Spanglish? Is it, and I think for translanguaging, I really think, I know it opens up that door for them to practice and to express themselves. And it's very much tied to identity too. So I think having that, it builds that confidence, and then with education, with the different content areas, and depending what context, if they're in a bilingual education program or not, that they can continue to expand their repertoire by talking with peers and so forth. So I will be sharing an example of Maestra Otero in the next couple of slides. The other core belief is that families and communities are valuable, and some of you mentioned that, about how that is so important, that we need to do more about that. And I bring the seminal work of the Dr. Mo, because I think, and Amante and Neff and Gonzalez, their work was, for me, it just impacted me so much, because I think we were drawing from those funds of knowledge, so much so, as you can see here in the chart, the original seminal work, what they documented in a very anthropological way of what these students were doing in this particular area of the Southwest, everything from agriculture to mining, etc., and just a lot of rich funds of knowledge. And so much so that I know in my classroom, when I taught in elementary, I drew from this and actually did a unit on medicinal remedies of our students, and brought in people that knew about it, and then even sent my students out to do a homeschool connection about qué remedios se usan en casa. And so the students have plenty to say. So I think we need to not forget that. And the next one is just the translanguaging core belief. The last one is that classrooms are democratic spaces. And I'm going to share with you, again, we always think of this hierarchy, that the teacher and the student. So we need to think of it, teacher as learner too. And so how do we work juntos with our students? And I'm going to share an audio, and hopefully you can hear it. And if you don't, please just put it in the chat. So Dr. Piñon, you can let me know. So this is one of the teachers that I work with. She's a kindergarten teacher, and just want for you to listen to her stance.
Kindergarten teachers have the unique privilege of introducing to and guiding children through the new world of school. A bilingual kindergarten teacher, for many, is also a guide into bilingual life. The concept of languages as a fixed set of rules and words, or the implications of speaking another language with proficiency, are often not firmly developed when students enter kindergarten. Instead, their understanding of languages, language ability, and language identity are quite fluid and will develop over the year. Translanguaging es natural for kindergartners because of this fluidity. They'll naturally use all of their language knowledge because it is not separated internally. An established translanguaging co-stance in this initial classroom experience will greatly affect the formation of their academic and bilingual identities this first year and very likely the years to come. In my bilingual journey, I have come to understand translanguaging as the acknowledgement of all knowledge and experiences and finding not only a harmony, but an essential usefulness in their connection. Establishing a translanguaging co-stance that encourages creativity and flexibility in language drawn from multiple sources of knowledge happens naturally because of the unique quality of kindergarteners. Despite my cultivating such a fluidity, my class does have mandated language allocations. I, however, do not demand that the children adjust their speech accordingly throughout the day. It would not be realistic, nor would it be fair. We are not fully immersed in the target language at the school level, and these young children are just learning to use their voice to contribute to classroom conversations. I would not want to discourage their emerging voices. Besides, often I'm checking for knowledge and understanding of concepts in our various subjects. Languages are just the vehicles the children use to get there.
So as you heard Monica there, just take a minute and so how would you describe Monica's stance? Just take a minute to put it in the chat, please. So how would you, what some thoughts about Monica's stance? Yes, choice, exactly. Those two words that you included there. The choices she's given them. Exactly. Thank you. Okay. You can continue to input there if you like. Yes, the flexible and allows construction of language to be organic. It's a good word, organic, about her stance. Thank you so much for your input. So now I know in our discussion I mentioned Maestra Otero and some of the work that I've published, and I think it's and co-authored with her. I think it's we're going to move through the reflective process of what to enact in your classroom program or wherever context you are in. And I'm going to draw from the voices from the field and translanguaging practices in particular. So I'm going to show you some examples. This is a picture of our some work that I did at a large school district in the Southwest. And it was a biliteracy and translanguaging participatory action research. That I was privileged to do with my teachers here, and hopefully soon we'll be publishing with them some of the work, and including Elva or Maestra Otero, as I refer to her, her pseudonym. And so a little bit about her, just to give you some background about Maestra Otero. She grew up understanding Spanish and was able to revitalize her languaging practices, as she said, through bilingual education, exchange programs, and with her morning cafecito with her abuelitos. Maestra Otero was teaching third grade in a dual language bilingual education classroom. And she, in her classroom, she had about 3/4 that were Chicano, Chicana, Chicanx, Mexican American, no Mexicanos, also some Native American students in her classroom that were Isla Pueblo. And then in her bilingual education program, it was a community program, English, Spanish. And then the last thing is that I did was, again, privileged to work with her for an entire year in her classroom and implementing translanguaging. So we both learned so much in designing this. And so the part of the work that she did was looking at a unit in particular. She was, of course, using the Common Core State Standards, and in New Mexico, we adopted some new social studies standards. And so her design had to do with encuentros, diferentes puntos de vista, and so looking at social studies standards. But she wanted to really come from a perspective of a critical perspective, if you will, because a lot of the texts that the reading program had were kind of promoting this whole conquest thing and so forth, and not taking into account the Native American population or even the Nuevo Mexicanos that were there. And so she found a book that I will show the cover to it. But she wanted the students to form their own punto de vista about the author's text. So she did a great job with that, and so kind of the purpose of the whole, as she called it, a translanguaging lesson, was that she wanted them to use their whole linguistic repertoire, but she did have planned for it. So she had a purpose for it, and you could see her central question there. What makes people view the same experiences in different ways was very essential to her. But then the performances that they had to do, and this comes from the work that, of course, they've done with Ofelia Garcia and Kate Seltzer, is the general linguistic, if you will, is when they are allowed to use their entire linguistic repertoire, versus language specific when it's in this case, in this particular lesson, she was really focusing for them to develop and create a Spanish text. Granted, as you will see, this particular student did translanguage in her text for someone, and I'll let you see that. But you can see that, again, the whole goal is for them to compare and contrast the important points, key details, and so forth. And most importantly, with this encounter with Spanish explorers and Native Americans. And then in Spanish, it was estudiantes van a expresar su opinión y elaborar una estructura organizativa que enumera las razones que apoyan su opinión. So again, the organization was also important to her for her students. She did a pre-evaluation of her students' work because she thought that it was very important to see where they were at. And you could see here the student's name. The pseudonym is Valentina, and she, if you notice, el tema eran los indígenas y los españoles amigos o enemigos. Were the indigenous and the Spaniards friends or foe, if you will? And the student responded in this and said, mi opinión del encuentro es enemigos porque los españoles reclaman sus tierras. They had a war y they said mean things. And so that was the student's point of view of what they thought about the Spaniards. The encounter with the Spaniards and the Native Americans, that they thought that they were this particular Valentina thought they were enemies because they were trying to reclaim or gain the property of theirs, and they went to war with them. So that's the pre. Now the whole process, I noticed I kind of mentioned the purpose, and the whole process of it, she used the teaching and learning cycle, and this was work that Doctora Maria Brisk out of she's in the East Coast, University of Massachusetts, I believe. And so the thing is that in this teaching and learning cycle, there's 3 phases to it. There's a deconstruction of text, then there's the joint construction, and then the independent construction of the text. And this is the text that she chose in Spanish. and for them to be able to build this background knowledge. She also used a lot of visuals. She also brought in some of the Native American community, particularly from the Isla Pueblo, to talk about the encuentro, the encounter, and their experiences. Although the text was in Spanish, she also deconstructed in Spanish, or even looked, if you look at the graphic organizer, was in Spanish. So all the models were in Spanish, the text, the graphic organizer. But as I said, she didn't limit it to that. She also brought in someone that spoke Keres that was able to then express it and then share a little in English about it. But when I mean when it was only in Spanish, it's also that she allowed the Translanguaging Corriente to flow so that they can express themselves. But the actual oral or written text, like in this case, these written texts, they were in Spanish, as you can see in the target language, as kind of a mentor text, if you will. And in the joint construction, she was then able to, in this space, this is where she really opened up the very explicitly the joint construction, the translanguaging space. I'm sorry. You can see she still had her objectives in Spanish, which was in a dual language, Spanish English. That was the target language. But then she created these little flip cards here where they were in English and in Spanish on one side. And in this picture that you see here of these two students, they were allowed. She explained to them what translanguaging was, and they knew, and they were, a lot of them were very bilingually expressing themselves. And as students listened, you can see it was a fishbowl, but they used these little flip cards, if you will, to in this case, one of the students, the student here with the gray sweat top, used Spanish, and then the one with the green sweat top, she actually responded back in English. And then sometimes they flipped, like vice versa, depending again what they recollected from the story and so forth. But it's very organic, very fluid way of expressing. And these are just some other activities that they use to be able to go through that. And so then the outcome was an individual construction that she wanted them. But I want you to note that here, remember, it was in December, and here I missed putting the dates. But a week after, the student was then able to write this post, a week after having these different, opening up these different translanguaging spaces. Even though I know a lot of the texts that she used to build a background knowledge and all that were in Spanish, she definitely then was able to construct this particular essay, or opinion, I should say. And so I'll give you a little bit, give you a minute to read it. And I understand, I know some of you may not be able to read Spanish. So as I give you all a minute to read it, I will then talk about it in English to give you kind of a synthesis of it. So as you can see in the first paragraph, the student starts with a question. Do you know what the encounter is? And then states the specific Indian group, the Pito, the Pito Indians, and talks about how 500 Spaniards came in 1548 and from Mexico, and that they were cruel to them and to the indigenous people. And they walked 90 miles in the heat, and they felt that these the Indian Pitos were angry of the Spanish because they came. And so this first paragraph, that's what the student refers to. But you can see that the student is starting to form the opinion, and then actually has the reasons for in the second paragraph here. And so the student says that, my first, and use this, for example, some of the language structures that the teacher provided, like mi primera razón, my first reason, is that they were cruel because they were soldiers, and they wanted to go to war, and they And they also got a lot of Native Americans sick as they walked, and they were thirsty. So that's why the student justifies that. That's why they were angry and they wanted to and got a lot of the Native Americans sick, and that they were just cruel to them, and so forth. And so you can note here that the student in the second paragraph here says, "Mi opinión es los españoles were greedy." And codicioso is a word that the teacher, which means greedy in Spanish, that she used as a vocabulary and a word wall and so forth. But in interviewing, the teacher asked her, ¿reconoces la palabra greedy in Español? And the student said, yeah, codicioso. But the student then said in English, well, but I chose greedy because I really think, I know in my particular context, in my home, that's how we referred to the Españoles as greedy, and that was their own personal experience and so forth. So that was, again, they always know why they're doing it. It's not a mystery. I think anytime that I interview a student, it's always great to hear what their perspective is, their voice, and that's what one of the other things that Maestro Otero wanted, is to hear their voice. So I want you to just put in the chat there and think about what do you notice about the student's final writing piece? So what are some noticings? And you can just give you a couple of minutes to put those into the chat as we went through the final draft here. Or any questions that you may have. You can unmute yourself, either or. And some of you put there flexible and always construction of language to be organic. And you put a clear development in vocabulary as well. The focus is sharing meaning. Yes, Juan, thank you. They were able to support their opinion with reasons, was able to organize thought and make a case for her point of view in her own ways of expressing herself. Exactly. And I think that was the point that, just in sharing some of the words that were sprinkled in English, the student knew why she chose those. Structure of the writing is much more developed. Yes. And again, this was a week, and the teacher continued to further develop it throughout the year. This was about mid-year, and meaningful sentences. And again, obviously, like all of us with writing, it's a very recursive. So we continue to go back, and the students, a lot of their writing at the end of the year was great. And in Espanol, which was one of the goals of the teacher. And then again, for them to really be able to have, so we could really be able to hear their voice. That was very important to us. And with that comes translanguaging. I think some of the words that they selected, you can see that was evident in there. So thank you for sharing some of your thoughts about this writing piece. And I know I'll move on because we have about 20 minutes, and I do want to give you some time to preview some of the resources. So some other translanguaging practices that I'm going to review here or show you here is that some of the work that Sanchez, Garcia, and Solorza I found very useful with my teacher educators in really looking at how do we start enacting this, right, in our classrooms, and in particular in dual language. Because I think that's where I find the most tension because of the language separation that is part of the language allocation. And so this framework that they built is the translanguaging documentation and opening up translanguaging spaces and providing rings, and then translanguaging transformation, which I'll describe a little more. And so the translanguaging documentation, I think it's good. It's always good to know what your classroom, in whatever context you're in. And I know in my university, the way I do it is I use the language portraits to really see who are my students linguistically and culturally. You can use in K through 12 definitely get an inventory of like what do they know. I mean, our students get assessed so much that we need to really use them, because if they're doing it, we need to draw from those assessments that they're doing. in K through 12 context, of course, but they, English and Spanish, and they're in their literacy in English and Spanish, and or also you can do, interviews with them that could be more fluid, and they could use their whole linguistic repertoire. But I think once you know that, then I think the next part of it is then the teachers can then plan these translanguaging rings. And basically what they are is, like, for example, I have an example here of Carlos. This particular student that I was working in at a school, he was a newcomer. And I knew that he needed scaffolds in English, and especially to write. And so to write in English and in Spanish. So in order to do that, we were there. The classroom teacher was reading one of the literature of Holes, and it was in Spanish. So as I say here, it compares one paragraph to English version, then meets with the teacher in peers. So he was able to read them both and compare it and contrast. And that was really rich, because then the students started making connections with this. So this is a kind of ring that it's kind of curated for the students so that they're able to make sense of that. But again, you have to have that documentation to be able to know what rings, and basically rings equals scaffolds, what scaffold supports you can provide the student. The second example is Cristina, which is more of an emergent bilingual, and we wanted to encourage her to speak more Spanish. So when she had discussion groups, we placed her with students that spoke more in Spanish and so forth, and that's how the rings work. And then the last part of it, this last space, is the translanguaging space, transformative space, I'm sorry. And this actually, just an example that I'll provide, of course, Maestra Otero's Encuentro example was very rich, how she provided those, and was very transformative for students in their writing ability, and their voice as well. But then further, the Cuéntame Algo space is a space that one of my a study that I did for my dissertation, that the teacher was doing read alouds, and she called them Cuéntame Algo. It was a 5th grade teacher. She brought in a book from Paul Herrera, and it was a Spanish book, but in it she had the story is about railroad builders from Chihuahua that came to El Paso, and then they were also they would also build. The railroad was being built to Kansas. But in the text, the author chooses to put, and a lot of these, but one of them that stood out for the students was the railroad workers would use si te cansas when they wanted to refer to Kansas, because they found it easier for them to express themselves of where they were, the railroad was going to, from Chihuahua to Kansas. So they're like, the Chihuahua, así te cansas. And so that was their way. But what I found in my research is that the students just started laughing. They're like, oh my goodness, mi mamá usa algo así para flor. En lugar de decir flor, like in English, usa flor, la pronunciación, pero eso le ayuda a recordar cómo pronunciarlo en inglés. And just a rich metalinguistic analysis and so forth. So there's just a lot of things that translanguaging brings, not only culturally, but also linguistically, that the students are able to express. The last thing is that, as far as translanguaging practices, is that Ophelia came out with this, and Clefling, these translanguaging biliteracies, excuse me. And so it's the translanguaging affordances. And so that really has to do with teachers provide bilingual students with extended resources like print, video, audio, new media technologies. Or the second one, there's translanguaging co-labor. So it's teachers encourage bilingual students' collaborative work, actions that take them beyond individual meaning making. And I'm sorry. And then translanguaging assessments, and similar to what I showed a little bit earlier about the translanguaging objectives, like the general linguistic and language specific. But further in the assessments, teachers develop formative and summative assessments designed to observe multilingual students' literacy acts more closely. So again, the multilingualism is being drawn and not always separated to English or language other than English. And then, I don't know why I keep clicking this. And then Translanguaging Reflections is there to activate a critical multilingual awareness. Teachers give students license to reflect on their own bilingualism and biliteracy and on their own meaning-making resources in comparison with the repertoires of others. And then lastly, the Translanguaging Production. Teachers mobilize students to leverage their translanguaging as they engage with spoken, written, and other meaningful resources as tools at hand, producing new text as they do so. And so I have, as I talked about, affordances. These are just different ways that you can do that. And hopefully you will get a chance to listen to some of my other colleagues that have presented, because they also have great examples of how to do this in the classroom. Such as like print, video, their own bodies when they express themselves, teachers welcoming families and communities. Students take up model translanguaging texts such as Valentina did and Maestra Otero that I showed recently. So in your in the chat box, we'll take a minute to pause here before we do the last section for you to view some of the resources. Is what translanguaging practices, ideology, and theory connections have you made so far? So, so what are the thoughts about translanguaging practices, ideology, and theory, or questions, or epiphanies? So let's pause to reflect a little bit here. And please put it in the chat box for all to see. Thank you. Or you can unmute yourself after the 2 minutes to share as well. Yes, translanguaging is vida. Yes, I love that. Translanguaging equals transformation, most certainly. The humanity, inclusion, and reaffirming identity is awesome. That's great. Good to hear that. Give you another minute to share with us. Anyone else like to share? Or you can unmute yourself if you'd like to say something. Don't be shy. I'm thinking how translanguaging may promote heritage language learning. And its relationship to bi and multiliteracy. Yes, great point, Shalene. Definitely. Translanguaging is a way to honor the students' language repertoire. Students can now get the opportunity to excel. Thank you, Salima. Language itself is a ever-growing, developing with translanguaging. It's inclusive. Yes, the inclusiveness is very important. Yes, how you can facilitate, even if you don't know the language. So thank you so much for sharing. So in this last part here with the 10 minutes that we have, I'm going to share just a couple. I have a lot of different, as we look at in teacher education, in higher education, and really in K-12, because I think all our pre-service and service teachers is how this ideological and pedagogical clarity. And now more and more, I'm thinking the translanguaging clarity that teachers have as we learn about translanguaging in our context. And again, I want to emphasize that, as Antonio Machado says, se hace camino al andar. So that's how I think about our translanguaging pedagogy. I think about it that there's a stance, a design, and a shift, but it's always, we're always learning. And when I learn something, a new belief or ideology that I'm like, or theory, and I'm like, And so I start implementing and discussing and dialoguing. And then all of a sudden I'm implementing a component of it. And of course it has to be grounded in who I am and so forth. And so I think that's why I love this, that se hace caminar al andar, right? It's not just like, it's just, we're always evolving and changing and humanizing ways with our teachers. And so this is in particular translanguaging shifts that students have said. So how they use translanguaging shifts. So meaning when they're in the classroom, how is it that they shift to using translanguaging, or maybe shift to a particular language, specific language. And some of them have said that they do it for translation, responded in language used previously, use Spanish sentence starters, but complete in English. Another student said, aware of language use. So are we in English or in Spanish? Some students make decisions about what language to use and word choice. I love that they said that they make the decision. So again, the agency is very important. And then another one is a testimonial of a teacher. And I have several, but I'm going to browse through this so we can get to the last practical part of it. And this in particular, this teacher said, I have learned so much through the study group. Going through and deciphering general linguistic and language specific tasks was eye-opening for me. I have learned to pre-plan what will be language specific and what will be general linguistic, and to communicate the why to my students. When I share my instructional decisions with my students, they better understand the learning goal to have the concept I always knew to be formalized and put into usable format is awesome. And so some of the learning themes that I think for the teachers, that the performance-based assessments, the flexible language use, and the language specific, and the student agency of this the student. I'm going to go ahead and move in particular to this one here, because I think this last one here is that I had some Native American teachers learning about translanguaging, and they said teaching about their history, the Navajo talkers, transgenerational trauma and language. So really learning about that and how translanguaging looks different in Native American populations. Down to this third one here, this particular focus group that I had with teachers, they said translanguaging sees things differently. Una semillita, a seed, has been placed, and each of us grow it our own way, bringing it all our perspectives and how we work at this translanguaging practice, and making it grow, and even bringing more ideas to enrich the definition of translanguaging and show what it looks like in your classroom by bringing diversity of ideas. So I really love that sharing of our students. And so now I'm going to move here to this last part here, where I want you to you have a handout that has if you look in your handouts, hopefully you have access to them. If not, I know they're going to be posted after the webinar is uploaded, or the video and handouts will be in the IDRA website of the convening. And so one of the things that I like to leave teachers with, educators, wherever context you're in, is that, and there's lots of resources, and I know Dr. Seltzer shared some of these, and she was actually the director of this, and of the CUNY NICEP. And these are, of course, hyperlinks, but we actually made them into handouts. And some of the resources are, of course, like the Translanguaging, the original one here of the CUNY NICEP Guide for Educators, the Translanguaging Pedagogy for Writing, which was Ascencio Moreno presented as well, and then for dual language in particular, and then for long-term English learners. So the task that I leave you with is that, and then listed that we have created a Padlet with translanguaging resources. So that's awesome. Thank you so much. Is that as you reflect, is look at how get this particular handout, view some of these. And I like to point out to all of us that we're all in different translanguaging entry points. We're all in different entry points depending where we're at. And so I like to also make it, kind of differentiating, because depending where we're at, some of us may be at the point where we're like, wow, we're ready to maybe include more multilingual ecology. So if you look at this specifically in the CUNY NICEP guide, the Translanguaging guide, in page 40 has a community study where teachers go into the neighborhoods with their students and study the neighborhood and see the vibrant bilingualism that happens. They document it, bring it back in. And so ask yourself, what is already happening in my classroom program or courses? But what are some of the next steps? Or perhaps you're at the activities where you can look at, for example, the double entry journal that shows in the Translanguaging writing guide, which is another resource there. In page 24 of this double entry journal, where students can input in very bilingual ways and express themselves of readings that they're doing. And then lastly, the curricula, which I think is always the one that I with my teacher educators working with, whether it's with the type of literacy programs that they have, that how they can include it, and so that you have examples in the translanguaging units. So there are particular units that you can look at. In particular, if you look at the family photo one, is it one very accessible to start with. But again, ask yourself, what is already happening and what are the next steps that you can do? So as I leave you, you can definitely take those and have some time to reflect and self-reflect too, using this particular ways about the stands, the design, the shifts that happen in your particular practice. And so I think it's very important to do that, because to develop, especially in, I believe in teacher education, we have a broad range of educators. Mine are mostly future bilingual educators, or already in-service educators, or English language development, or TESOL teachers, and so translanguaging has been a topic that I research with them and be able to explore different ways of doing translanguaging in the particular context. And hopefully today you got some ideas, and also of how we can better what to do with our future educators. I think it's translanguaging is here to stay. I know some people say it's a fad, but for me, it's a way of living, and it always has been. So I hope that you see that, and I know you have, because of our conversations that we had. And I'm going to leave you with a quote that Maestra Otero reflected. She gave me so much information, so much to think about translanguaging. And so she says, by setting the river in motion, by designing curriculum that holds the target language as a priority, by introducing the text in the target language, making it accessible to all language learners with a differentiation and planned times for translanguaging, language has flowed naturally throughout the unit, harnessing a natural energy to shape proficient Spanish writers, or I would say even bilingual writers, as she discovered towards the end of our time together. But what I love that she said was that harnessing a natural energy to shape, again, you could say proficient English, Spanish, or bilinguals, and so forth. And so eloquently that she said. And I leave you with thank you so much for participating today. I thoroughly enjoyed our pláticas as we went into breakout rooms. And if you need anything, any question you have, any comment, or if you want to Zoom about translanguaging, I'm always available, or make the time. And you can see my email there. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Ibarra-Johnson. Always so much great information. I'm excited about our last session. Hopefully you all have a wonderful lunch and join us at 1. Thank you, Dr. Ibarra-Johnson. Wonderful presentation.
Gracias. Thank you.
I always especially love your testimonials, Dr. Johnson.
Oh, thank you. My teachers, they're like fabulous. They're just, this is why I love participatory design or action research, because I get to work with teachers. That it's just great work. I learned so much from them. So yeah, thank you.
I'm going to close out the webinar.
Okay. All right. Well,
Thank you, Dr. Ibarra-Johnson.
Yeah, we'll see. What time do you present? It's at
1 o'clock.
1 o'clock. Okay. Bueno, suerte.
No, in an hour.
In an hour. I'm sure you'll do fine. Okay. We'll see you.
Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
make sure to sign to fill out the survey as you leave.
Oh, okay. I know.